All right, so we're back. Gus and Travis talk
Yes.
film. What are we talking about this week, Gus?
Well, I mean, if you were supposed to select,
Okay.
but then
Right.
you selected, what did you say?
I said, well, we'll still do it, but
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about the films we've seen so far in theaters this year. Basically, like a halfway through the year, what's the best, what's the worst that we've seen?
Okay, I couldn't remember all of them to start with. I
Okay.
mean, I would have had to go back and really
Right.
listen. But then I suggested that we talk about sex in the cinema.
Right.
And my reason for that was I felt that it was a subject that a lot of people don't really address. It's always there.
Yeah.
And it's in life as well, and they don't address it. We don't address it too much in life except in tabloids and, rumor mills and that kind of thing. But the cinema has it, and I just wanted to talk about what we thought was real sex in the cinema. Playing sex scenes, that's what I said, when you kind of sent me an email and said, well, it'd be a one-sided conversation.
Right. Well, I think you have more thoughts on it than I do.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that I don't have thoughts on it.
Yeah, but then I sent back, and because I am curious, and that's why I sent back the questions to you, where I said, one, you've directed sex scenes and love scenes, which frequently are one and the same, in the best possible circumstances.
Right.
You've also played them as well, and then so I said that from my perspective, you have multiple points of view on it. One from a director's,
Right.
two from a writer's, three from an actor's point of view, which is a unique position because I've never played a love scene or a sex scene in anything I've ever acted in. And so that to me is really interesting because you can talk about it from the inside out. You see what I'm saying?
That's true.
Emotionally, how you felt, understanding that essentially you're a stranger to the person you're playing with. I mean, yes, it's an actor person that you're playing with, but ostensibly they have a real relationship with someone. You have a real relationship with someone, but nevertheless, for whatever the shooting time is, you have to manufacture erotic feelings, romantic feelings to each other. So that was my question to you. One, how does one do it? And then how does one walk away from it when the scene is done?
Well, I mean, I've directed a variety of scenes. The first love scene I ever directed in the first short film I made at ASU was a love scene between two men.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Were you one of the men?
No, I was not one of the men. But what's interesting about that is that, one of them was gay, and the other one was bisexual. And then from me directing the love scene, they ended up having a little affair together outside of that. So that shows you where, sometimes it just is self-contained on the set, and then sometimes it, that those feelings continue. When I directed that love scene, I was thinking specifically about the scene in Don't Look Now with Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie, which is one of my favorite love scenes. It's not erotic at all, but I like the way that he cuts between them taking off each other's clothes and then putting on the clothes and getting ready to go out. And when I saw that scene, I was like, oh, that feels very real as to what making love and then what happens after you make love is about. Then I did some love scenes in a feature, Detective's Lover, and then I was in those, and we rehearsed to try to get into it, which means we ran lines like anything else, but then we also kissed and did a lot of our rehearsals in just our underwear, just to become more familiar with each other, so that when we actually did the love scene, it wasn't like, we're total strangers. The only other one that comes to mind was one I did recently, and that was just a very short love scene which I did with my girlfriend in a movie, a short film that we made, which we haven't put out yet. And what I learned from that is, no matter how much you care about the person in real life, what's funny is that doesn't mean it's going to translate. So just because you have all that inside you doesn't mean that it's going to translate or look good on screen, So I don't know if that answers your question to some degree.
Oh, it does, because as you were saying that, I was thinking that there were many married couples on screen who really didn't send erotic sparks from each other, and they had long-term marriages. I'm speaking like Paul Newman and Joan Woodward.
Right.
Like that.
Doesn't feel very
they
erotic.
played love scenes together, and they were okay. But I'm thinking of films like The Last Hot Summer, and the John O'Hara adaptation that they did. And she always seemed more romantic with other people, and he, of course, was a sex symbol of sorts, and he always seemed considerably more erotically engaged with, say, Piper Laurie in The Hustler, for instance. You see, and so being married doesn't absolutely do it. The same thing with Burton and Taylor. You know, they had that scandalous relationship, I mean, that hit headlines all over the country, and movie producers right away tried to capitalize on it with any number of films. I don't remember how many films they made together, maybe 9 or 10.
A lot, yeah.
And never had any spark that clearly they had outside of the film frame, you know, like that. And so it's interesting for that. You also said something that is a point that I wanted to make also, is you were talking about the Donald Sutherland film, Don't Look Now. And yes, that to me is one of the sexiest films. I mean, the sex scenes is among the sexiest I've seen. And the reason for that, as you said, it's because they're fully clothed. One of the things that always, I think, is a misunderstanding when people talk about sex scenes, they always think that, that means there's a lot of nudity.
Right.
For me, generally speaking, it's not, you know. If we're going to talk directly of sex in the cinema, of course, there's pornographic movies, which I find completely unerotic.
Yeah.
Because there's no human interest really in it. It's just graphic. I mean, you watch the people doing it, and for a moment, there's a kind of a shock thing because you're really seeing it on screen, which you're not used to. Mm-hmm. But the minute it starts extending itself, which it does in those films, it's not terribly interesting, you know. I always find that from a male perspective, from the male gaze, as they like to say it, that women dressed are considerably more sexy than women undressed. You know, films are full of, you know, frontal nudity of women, and I think, you know, it removes all the mystery.
Right.
The clothing hides things, and I find myself wondering what's back there,
right.
And I wish I could see, which explains the absurd thing that as men we get. If a woman is walking on the street and she's wearing a full skirt and a wind comes and it blows it up, we feel, oh my God, I've seen something I shouldn't have seen. But if we go to the beach and she's in a bathing suit, it's exactly the same thing. But we don't get excited there,
right?
Because it's out of context. But it's also that for a minute we get a flash of what's beneath the mystery.
That's true.
And for me, that's what makes erotic, romantic scenes in film, is when there is a mystery to the reason why this couple or these people are drawn to each other. When you talk about gay scenes in films, I still think one of the most sexual scenes and romantic and erotic scenes I've seen in a movie with that depicts a gay relationship was in a film called Sunday Bloody Sunday. Good with film. Peter Fitch.
Yeah.
And the love scenes in that seem so natural,
yes,
so real, that I was really, really caught up in it.
Yeah.
Another favorite film of mine is a film called Damage. And that's a film with Jeremy Irons and Juliette Binoche. And it's a film that says something that it doesn't really say it. It depicts the attraction, the lure of sexual attraction. And it doesn't say why, because of course that's a mystery. We don't know why we're really attracted to somebody. Yeah, sometimes we can say, you know, that person has a great shape, they have, you know, but it's really more than that. Right. It's a potency that just manifests itself. And in this film, it does. And, you know, when you were talking about how you played the love scene with that young woman, you said you kind of familiarized yourselves with each other. Well, the director, Louis Malle, reading a book of his talking about that film, he said that he shot all the love scenes first. He said because the two actors, Jeremy Irons and Juliette Binoche, hardly knew each other. They had never worked together before. They didn't know each other before. I mean, they'd been introduced. Right. But he said that if he had waited for later in the shoot, they would have become self-conscious. Mm-hmm. And so he immediately told them, you've got to do the love scenes, all of the love scenes, which are relatively explicit, and not explicit, I mean relatively long and erotic. And he just said to them, you know, we're going to do those first to get it out of the way.
Yep.
And they did it, and I could find no trace of strangeness or distance between them. They feel absolutely natural when he laid it out throughout the film. And so that's interesting. But one of the things I want to talk about really when I say sex in the film is our attitude to sex in the in cinema. Because one of the things, for instance, is the rating system is always throws me off. Simply because they will rate a film either restricted or X or whatever, based on, in quotes, sexual content. Sometimes they'll say strong language. They never speak about what I consider true pornography of sometimes in the cinema is violence.
Right.
The pornography of violence. I mean, I think I have a relatively tough perspective, but I find that the number of films that I actually turn my face away from a violent moment, I could see it coming. And then I think, oh goodness, they're going to make this thing completely explicit. They're going to chop an arm off and blood is going to spout. And I already know that. I've seen it.
Right.
And I don't need to see it again. So sometimes I look away and then look back. I feel the same way about certain sex scenes too. That I know that the actors, Hollywood actors anyway, are not going to go on to pornography when they shoot a sex scene. So I think, once the director gets the point across that they're lying in bed, he doesn't have to stay with it. I always feel embarrassed for the actors, really. I feel he doesn't have to stay with the scene that long to tell me, I know what's going on,
Yeah, and it depends on the film,
right,
obviously.
Of course. Another sexy scene of film for me is Carnal Knowledge. Yeah. And that doesn't have anything explicit at all in it, but you get that feeling.
Well, most of the explicit movies are not erotic. And that's the thing that I was going to say is, I don't feel like I've, ever done a sex scene that's erotic. Mm-hmm. And most sex scenes that I can think of don't capture that. Whereas, and there's the films that do are few and far between. Mm-hmm. For me, one is Body Heat.
Yes.
Body Heat is a movie where, again, it doesn't really show much, or at least the scenes that affect me most. The film is sexy just in its dialogue and its tension, and then something as simple as them sitting in a bathtub together saying, they've made love 5 or 6 times and they're sweaty, is sexy, and it just leaves a lot to the imagination. But I was thinking you were talking about couples. Another couple, Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, didn't really ever send off erotic sparks. And, Eyes Wide Shut is one of the movies that's considered to be one of the most sexually explicit, but it's not really erotic.
Yeah, that's what bothers me about that film.
Is it doesn't capture what the book captures, which is that sense of eroticism. And I was thinking about that when you asked to talk about this, especially in American movies. It seems like versus French films, we don't really understand eroticism. We understand shock value sex, right? And it even applies not just to United States, but I was thinking about Cronenberg's work, which is, he's a Canadian filmmaker. Right. But really his work, it's very sexual in movies like Crash and even History of Violence, but everything in it seems just a shock. I'm going to show you this to shock you, not to really create, a sensual feeling inside of you, which the French do so well. The filmmakers that come to mind are one of your favorite guys and my favorite is Francois Ozon. Mm-hmm. I don't remember the title of the short film, but I showed it to you. Yes, I film know. With a gay man who leaves his boyfriend, goes down to the beach, sees this woman taking men into the forest. Mm-hmm. He goes in there with her, has sex with her. It turns him on so much that he goes home and has sex with his boyfriend, and it's just the whole film is just so erotically charged. No matter what your sexual orientation is, and then a film like See the Sea, I think that's the name of it, which is like a 50-minute movie. It's a shorter feature, I guess you could call it. Has no sex in it, but it has the woman rubbing herself against the bedpost and things like that are odd, but it really connects with, like I said, the erotic feelings inside you.
Well, you speak of that. I remember, and I showed it several times in class. Swimming pool, this film, and that is so erotic.
It is,
and I remember the students getting a little uneasy, not because of anything explicit, but they're so unused to that in American cinema. They're used to the explicit depiction, but where just the feeling of eroticism and the scene that I think was particularly disturbing to them in the best possible way was the scene when Charlotte Rampling, who probably was in her mid-50s at that point, invites the gardener, who was probably 65, to come upstairs. You don't even see them in bed. It's just the way she lures him up.
And she just lays there, and that's enough.
And it is disturbing for a variety of reasons, I thought, to the younger people, because they're so used to seeing sex or even eroticism and romanticism depicted as the province of young people. And suddenly you get a 55-year-old and maybe a 65-year-old who are igniting these feelings, one for each other on screen, but the sparks are coming off the screen as well. And it was disturbing to them, I think, because they began to appreciate the fact that their parents are still alive in those ways.
Exactly.
You see.
Yeah.
There's a tendency
they don't want
to
be reminded of that.
But there's also a tendency to think of when you're young that your parents, you know, after they had you,
they stopped.
Whatever romantic feelings, sexual, erotic feelings they had has been put to rest.
That's funny.
You see, and that movie sort of ignited that. You know, but when you talk about body heat, which is one of my favorite of that, I think of its predecessor, and I really think of this as its predecessor, which I think is sexy without any kind of
actual sex
or even not nudity, because they wouldn't do it in those days, but even just showing somebody, say, in a bathing suit or brief outfit, and that is Double Indemnity. You know, just the dialogue between them is sexy, and the looks. You know, Barbara Stanwyck was just, you know, she was the quintessential femme fatale. You know, I also think of Kubrick's The Killing. The scenes involving both Marie Windsor with Elijah Cook, how she uses her sexual allure to beat him down, poor man, and then watching her with Vince Edwards, the hunk, and how she plays up to that. Both scenes, you know, all their scenes are extraordinarily sexy, and again, without being explicit, but to more than sexy, erotic. That was really the force of eroticism, to beat the husband down and to attempt to ignite the young man, which is why we never doubt the minute they get to talking and she tells him about the money, that he'd get himself involved in the plot. And we never doubt why a formerly straightforward, honest man like Elijah Cook would get into one of these heist situations. And to me, she represented, when we talk about film noir, the quintessential femme fatale. And that is the woman who knows and uses her sexual potency for her own interest in a variety of ways, some admirable, some not so admirable, and that's what makes it delicious.
Speaking of Kubrick, who, like I said, you know, Eyes Wide Shut's his most explicit film, but doesn't feel erotic. To me, even Barry Lyndon has moments of eroticism that are stronger than any of the moments in Eyes Wide Shut, and people are more clothed than they would be in anything else. You know, they're wearing these period costumes. The way that Ryan O'Neal is looking at the woman across the poker table. The way that the beginning with his cousin, with her hiding that there's something on her and him unwilling to touch her. Very erotic. Even the way that he stages him following the woman with the music out onto the patio has all of that tension that building that I think is just great. Why do you think, going back to the French, why do you think it is more natural for them to so many French filmmakers, not just those, just get it just naturally? Why is it natural for them? Why is it not natural for us? And on top of that, what are some other, can you think of other American films that don't fall into that?
Well, before we get to that, I want to mention Bergman.
Okay.
Because I think I think Persona has so many, not so many, but it has one of the most sexual scenes I've ever seen. And it's really essentially a monologue that she is relating about a past incident that he kind of depicts. And I watched that scene, and to me, it's like watching real pornography, you know, because nothing is explicit, but boy, does that put pictures in your mind. The other is Cries and Whispers. And again, the sexual tension between the sisters. The sister that Liv Ullmann plays, who is the promiscuous one, her relationship with her husband and with the doctor, who is her former lover in that story, is highly, highly sexual. And for the most part, and then the Silence, which was a film that in some cities in the U.S. the film was banned. Oh, and again, it wasn't because it was so explicit, but it was all the ideas that Bergman layered into all of his pictures that began to resonate in our minds, all sorts of disturbing ideas, all sorts of disturbing notions, and disturbing perspectives. And I always find it interesting that Bergman, the son of a minister, was frequently one of the most censored filmmakers, you know. And I always argued that one of the reasons why people did that with his films isn't because so much, yes, I know they're disturbed somewhat by the sex in that, but the ideas, they don't want to really wrestle with. The intellectual force of the films is what really irritates, and they just turn around and say, you know, I don't want to watch this anymore. Right. You know, let's censor it, or let's, they take a superficial reason as to why they will dismiss the picture, you know. Because there is that conceit that I only go to movies to be entertained, and by that they really mean to be taken away in some fashion by mindless action. I'm the opposite. I'm truly entertained, and I truly become, I get involved in escapism when I am absolutely held mentally, intellectually into the context of what's going on. If it's mindless and cartoon-like, I'm just going to sit there.
I check out.
I like that. So I'm always surprised at that. But to go back to your original question about the French and their naturalness with it, I have no definite answer. What I can tell you is how I feel about it. Ever since I was a kid, it was always, and this was sort of like received wisdom, right? That the French were more natural about things. I remember at one point, I was maybe 19 in New York, and Yves Montand, he came to do a concert, and I bought a ticket, and I went, and I wound up sitting next to this French woman, beautiful French woman, and she began to talk to me, and I quickly explained that I didn't speak French, and she was wonderfully gracious about explaining to me what Montand was doing. She spoke good English. And I looked at her immediately. I mean, she must have been at least 10 years older than I was at the time, maybe 15, because she looks somewhat mature, but I was immediately entranced with her in all the ways. And at a certain point, Montand, in his singing and stuff, there was something so terrific, charismatic, and sexy about him. I said, what is it about him that comes off? And she looked at me, and I never forgot. She said to me, this told me I had no chance with her. She said, well, I cannot explain. You have to be French.
That's great.
And that was it. And I was, oh God, like, I will never get a woman like this one because I'm not French. You see? And I'll never approach the charismatic force, sexual force of Yves Montand because funny. I'm not French. But the point I'm making is that ever since I was a kid, it always, the received wisdom. This is in the islands because we have a French village. It's called Carnal, and they are from Saint Bart's and the French islands, but their origins are French. My mother, she was part French, and we always knew that when it came to matters of sex, the heart, not poetic romance, but earthy, sexual romance, that the French were just culturally natural to it. They never made a big thing of it or whatever. I remember later I had a girlfriend and she had a French roommate. And I remember the roommate saying something. The roommate's name was Giselle. And Giselle said something, and like we were talking, and she was talking about some guy, and she says, well, I'm never turned off by a man until after I slept with him. And I was, oh, isn't that interesting?
That
And I
is.
remember my girlfriend saying, you see, she's French.
Right.
You see? So my only response to you with that is, ask me the question again.
What? So why does eroticism come more naturally to the French than the Americans?
I can only tell you have to be French to
There you
understand.
go.
So I don't
There you
know.
go.
I really don't, but it
Yeah,
does.
we
I have
are
no
less
doubt.
comfortable with it though,
Yes.
and they are more.
It probably has to do with our Christian ethic.
And
Yeah.
right, yeah, we're Puritan-based society supposedly, but
Where sex becomes a big sin.
right, exactly, and I think that where it is, because thinking of the most erotic films that we've made as Americans, it's our noir films.
Hmm? Yes.
It's our noir
Yeah,
films.
yeah,
'Cause
absolutely.
I'm thinking Body Heat,
Yes.
The Hot Spot by Dennis Hopper
right.
is
Oh,
one of the
gosh,
most
yes.
erotic I've ever seen.
Yes.
So that's really where
And
it
we
comes
have
through, is
actresses
through that
who-
genre.
Potentially, if given the opportunity, I mean, yes, they got them in noir earlier, like Marie Windsor, Ruth Roman,
Right.
a lot of those, Joanne Drew, but somebody like the one in
Virginia Madsen?
Virginia Madsen is who I want to say. I think she is being wasted so much in American film
Yeah.
because she has such erotic allure, and it has never been used properly.
Right.
Except for the hot spot. And then Jennifer Connelly was
And that's so-
extremely
yeah.
sexy in that
Right.
film.
And hasn't been used that way
Not
since.
at all. The other one is Sharon Stone, who has that.
Oh, yeah.
Now, somebody would say, well, what about Basic Instinct? But I
But
think
that's-
Basic Instinct is bluntly,
No, it's...
explicit.
Yes.
And that bothers me. I'll tell you one that I think has some erotic sexual allure, and that is, the title is getting me by, the one with Glenn Close and Michael Douglas.
Fatal Attraction.
Yes, Fatal Attraction. I think that has sexual allure. And Glenn Close again, because
Yeah.
she never looked movie star pretty.
Yeah.
She really looked like somebody you'd know on the street.
Yeah.
And even the jagged edge, the way they dressed her, she really looked like a handsome, sexy woman you'd see on the street.
That director, is he English or is he American?
Which one?
Adrian Lynn. Or I think that's...
I think he's American.
Because
Yeah.
he's gotten it a couple times.
Right,
Because I
yes.
also think he got moments of it with 9.5 Weeks.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
first 9.5 Weeks.
The whole nature of that
And
novel is that way.
I didn't
Yeah.
see Unfaithful, but I
Yeah.
heard that he got it
I
with that
saw.
too,
I saw it. I wasn't that.
on the border.
Yeah. For me, it was completely. It really just. It was a remake of a French film, and I
Right.
felt the French film was considerably
Was
more
better,
erotic
yeah.
and sexy.
But there's two movies I saw recently that I thought really broke boundaries, like sex wise, and they're two French films, of course.
Okay.
They came out last year, I think, or the year before. Blue is the Warmest Color, which
Mhm.
won
Yes,
the Palme
yes.
d'Or,
Right.
and it's a lesbian film,
Right.
And it has very explicit scenes in it, but I didn't feel like they were pushing it in any way. It comes very organic and naturally to the film. And the most erotic scene of the film is actually when the two characters are breaking up, right? And they're in a restaurant, they're in a public space, and they're breaking up, and one of them tries to finger the other one in the restaurant. It's sort of like it's like a last clutching desperate attempt, and that's actually the most, and you don't see anything. You've already seen everything you could possibly think of before that, but that moment is the most erotic. And then the other film, and I thought that was a great film that I saw, which feels like it comes from a different planet when you compare it to American film. Usually did The Martians in this movie, is a movie called Stranger by the Lake, which is also a French movie, came out last year, and that's a gay film, right? And this film features so much male nudity that by the time you're done watching it, you're just like, yeah. I mean, like literally, almost in every scene, every male character is fully nude. It becomes completely natural by the end of the film, but it's about these guys that go to this lake, and they hang out there, and they go there to swing and get laid, and there's this murder that happens, but it is extremely erotic. So I think that the French are still pushing the boundaries.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, Scorsese said it once, and I agree with him, that eroticism is the one area in film that's still, what would you say, a frontier. There's still a frontier there.
The uncharted
things
territory.
to be explored there, and I agree with him. and I wish he would explore it in his work, but it doesn't seem to come
It
naturally.
doesn't. No. His orientation is considered
like,
different.
well, again, example, Wolf of Wall Street. Yeah. That's the perfect example of the way Americans deal with sex. Right. It's all shock value. Yeah. It's all in your face. It's pornographic. It's not erotic.
And even Casino, for that matter. It's just out there. It's not very sexual. The sexiest film, I think, it still stays with me. It's an old film, and most people have never heard of it. It's a film called, I've talked to you about it, a British film called No Love for Johnny. Okay. And Peter Finch again, who I thought was an interestingly erotic actor. He didn't have any great physique or anything, but there was something about the way he projected, because he played gay men several times. He played the best Oscar Wilde I'd seen. But anyway, in this film, he plays a fellow from the working class who gets into Parliament. And he has a secretary that suddenly, because he's married, and has a secretary that suddenly he's really involved, he becomes sexually involved with. And it becomes such, and the scene just sort of going to a hotel and coming out, that at one point they go, to have this illicit relationship with each other in a hotel room or motel room. And he's not present when a really important bill that would be beneficial to his constituency was being voted on, and he wasn't there to cast the deciding vote, and subsequently he loses his position. And it's all because of that feeling of erotic love and sexual need that the two of them generated. And I remember a friend and I saw it together, this other guy, and we say, this is such a sexy film. And then years later, like 20 years later, we're talking about some film that's appeared sexy, and he said, remember No Love for Johnny? And we both once again agreed that it was the sexiest movie that we had ever seen. And I guess, again, both people were, I don't think there was ever a scene where there was a couple of scenes in bed, but I think they showed them from here up. So there's no nudity or any of that involved with it.
Well, I would like to do a film, an erotic film that features no actual sex or love-making scenes. I think that would be an interesting challenge, and not just a short film. That's not long enough.
No, because you
but
can
to
sustain
make a
the shot
feature where people never take off their clothes, none of that. It's all done outside of that. I think you would make a very interesting point by eliminating all explicitness. But basically, your goal is to leave. I would want people to leave the theater, and they're just charged with that sensual feeling. They just want to explode.
Well, the thing with that, one of the reasons why I think it hasn't been done is because it's so damn difficult.
Right.
What you just said. Yeah. I wrote a play that wound up being erotic. I didn't know it was until it was on stage.
It's almost accidental.
Yeah, so it was accidental. Today, if I willed to do it, I don't know if I could achieve it. Right. But as I said, in cinema, which has really more fluidity than the stage, the one force the stage has is you have the two live people. So if they generate some excitement between them, that can palpably be felt within the audience. With film, it's really more than, yes, you need the actors to have the feeling, but by the same token, the camera has to catch it. It has to be through direction, it has to be lighting, it has to be through edits. Yeah. How you cut, how they look at each other. When you're talking about sex scenes, one of the best, and it's also comic, is the eating scene in Tom Jones. That is so sexy.
It is,
because of all the things it suggests. Without ever saying anything. And they do exactly what you said you want somebody to do with the mythical film you said you like to make, because as soon as they finish eating, they run out and they run upstairs to a room.
The other film that I think, the other idea I've had when it comes to approaching eroticism, and I've shared this with you before, is since we're a Puritan society, right, supposedly, and there's so much Christian influence on the American culture, I think it would be really interesting to go to the heart of the Bible and take out Song of Solomon, the book Song of Solomon, or Song of Songs. It's got two different, people call it two different things, which is really an extremely erotic book of the Bible that, in my experience, most Christians just kind of pass over. They don't really know quite what to do with it. Some people will say, it's all metaphor, but it's very sexual. right? And to take that and to try to adapt that. And considering that Solomon, if you know anything about the Bible, was sort of a very erotic king or person, right? You know? And to try to do something with that, I think, without pushing it, without trying to push any message, just as it is, would be a really interesting project if someone could pull it off. So that's passed around in my head for a long time.
That's an interesting thing. As you said that, I think of the story of David and Goliath. Because Bathsheba is at the center of that.
Yes.
And the force of their relationship after, because it also brings the thing that, we always say cinema is composed of sex and violence. Because she doesn't really get erotically charged with David until he slays Goliath.
Right.
And then...
It's not Goliath. No, is it Goliath?
Yeah.
But he kill her? He kills her husband.
Yeah, later,
that's the story. He sends her husband out.
Yeah. But the charge is there.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? And so, as you said, the Bible is full of that kind of stuff, and it would be fun, to really explore some of that. I never thought of that before, but that's a really, really interesting idea.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about eroticism in cinema, I think frequently it's accidentally arrived at. And I mean, even when you're making the picture, sometimes you look at all of it, and when you're going to direct it, you say, "Oh my goodness, this could be an erotic scene,"
right?
And then you direct it as such, and that's where it would come. I think if you explicitly start with, "Oh, I'm going to make this erotic," it'll probably elude you.
Yeah.
But when you look, you say, "Oh, this scene has erotic possibilities," and then you begin to pull out those aspects of it. That's what I think, with the film, Sex in the Cinema. I'm glad we talked about it because I wanted to really address it, one from a viewer's perspective, but also from a filmmaker's perspective. So it gives both sides of it. We can talk about that. And it'd be fun if people would even send us emails and tell us the films they consider sexy. And the scenes they consider sexy.
I agree.
Because sex is also a very personal thing. And what you think of as sexy, I don't necessarily. And so we probably have not mentioned a lot of really sexy scenes or even noticed them.
Yeah.
And so it would be fun if people would actually send us email and say, "Listen, I think this scene is sexy, and tell us why." So that'd be fun.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So next time we'll talk about the best films and
so
the worst.
Yeah.
Right, of 2014 so
good,
far.
Good.
Cool.
I'll have to scour my memory
there you go.
a little bit.
All right. See you soon.
Okay, bye.